Hey everyone, my name is Brittany Lewis. I'm a professional artist, graphic designer, and tarot deck enthusiast. And today I want to just show you really quickly how I established flats in a illustration before we get into detail. Now, if you're new here, welcome. First of all, welcome. Typically on Sundays, what I will do is usually walk through the creation of my dream project, the Cosmic Gateways Tarot. But this Sunday we had some technical difficulties, so I decided to make this an actual impromptu video. Now, before we get into it, I am working in Clip Studio Paint, specifically version 1. I'm also working in on a Huion Kamvas 24 4K. Now, if you're starting your journey in digital art, you don't have to have all of these things. This is just what I'm working in. Now, if we want to take a look at our screen, we have a few bits of information. At the very bottom right below my face is my reference panel. This is where I have all of my reference materials so that I can create the illustration that I have in mind. I gathered these references from all over the internet, usually from a website called Pexels. And also I'm using other cards that I have created in this series over the years for my references so that I can create continuity in those particular, in this project, right? All right, so I do have to my right, there is a panel. If you see my mouse moving around, I'm hoping that you can. That is my layers panel. And what I'm going to do and what I have is all of my sketches that I've done so far. I'm going to put those in a folder and I'm going to label that sketch. And then what I'm going to do is set the blend mode to multiply, which will allow me to see the sketch on top of whatever it is that I color in, but it'll also still show up pretty evenly. It'll blend into whatever it is that I add to this particular file. Now, my next step is to add a new layer in that same panel, the layers panel, and I'm going to work my way from back forward. So in other words, what I'm going to do is I am going to paint in my sky, and then whatever will go on top of the sky, which will be the orange and the sand, and then I'll just sort of make my way or sort of build like a layer cake from the bottom layer all the way to the top. That is how our layers work. So before we do that, what I'm going to do is show you what I'm going to use for my color palette for the actual sort of tone of this piece. Now, if you're new here and you have not been following along with this project, this particular card is the Three of Wands, which is the first 3 in this series. Now, I have done a couple videos developing this particular set of cards. There's all of the 3s. And this one, I am going to set this in the desert, but I am using a character that we've seen before. And I'll show you that in just a bit. But our first step, I really like the color of this particular desert scene. It has the oranges, it has the very deep blues, it is set at night. And most of the images for this particular project are set at night. So we're going to keep the flow of that in. And now there may be a little bit of a lag. I'm hoping that it's not. This is my first time doing a paint as you go sort of standalone video without too much editing or anything like that. So I am going to grab my paint bucket tool, which is over to my left, and some of that will be hidden behind my face, but I'm going to grab my paint bucket tool. I'm going to grab the darkest color in this particular scene, which is like a smoky blue, and I'm going to drop that in real easy. And again, flats are just the baseline colors. Now that is extremely dark, so what I'm going to do is go back up to my sketches. I'm going to make that a little bit darker just so I can see, and I may even change the tone of this particular blue. But you know what, I think what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to create a layer on top of that and add some of the lighter colors into it, and then we'll paint it as we go. Now, another way that I can attack this is to do a gradient and set up a gradient, but I actually kind of like the idea of being able to add colors as I go, and I kind of blend them out. And I also make my sketch a little bit darker, so again that it stands up. But this is the basis of my sky layer, right? And so I'm just laying in these colors. Again, another way we can attack this or sort of approach this particular situation is to set up a gradient, but I'm going to do it manually because it gives me a little bit more texture, right? And I have a little more control over how I want to create this particular background. So what I'm going to do is grab my smudge tool. Now, when I'm creating digital illustrations, what I will do is typically use a brush, which is what we sort of laid the base of this the two variations of the colors down in. And then I also grab a smudge tool. I like the smudges because I can get a little bit of texture, because I tend to gravitate towards a very painterly look when it comes to digital artwork. Even though this is pixels and things like that we're working with, I do enjoy having sort of that texture, right? I'm not necessarily trying to mimic traditional work, but my background is in traditional, and so I do like to have that set in place. So I'm just going to do a very light, and I'm not going to spend too much time setting this up, because we'll come back to it later. The main thing is that we have sort of the basic color down, and what I'll do from here is I will add one more sort of layer of light color on top. And that'll be sort of at our horizon line. And again, I'm gonna go back to my smudge brush and smudge this out. Now, as I've said before, there is a much easier way to approach this particular task, but I do like, again, the texture of being able to smudge and move colors around. But I'm just going to swipe this oh so softly across, and then later I'll be able to smoothen this out. But this is sort of the basis of what we're going for in terms of the background, right? Now, the next layer that I'm going to add to my layer cake of pixels is going to be the sandy color, right? So, and I'll turn this off just so we can kind of get a look of the sketch, because I don't know if I explained too much about what we have going on. But as soon as there we go, got a little bit of lag. So in this sketch, we have a figure who's standing sort of above this sandy region. And within this sandy region, she also has statues and monuments and things like that are sort of emerging from this sand. And the idea is that she's coming to this discovery, and she's sort of making her way to the pyramid in the background. Now, initially I wanted this all to be a portal, and I'm actually going to keep the darker layers turned off for right now, only so that we can see what we're doing. And so what I'm going to do is grab that brush again. I'm going to grab a middle tone orange from this image, from our reference image, and I am going to very quickly make a selection around the outside of our sand dunes, and then I'm going to fill that in with my base color. Again, I'm building this sort of layer cake or this image very much like I would a layer cake, right? So I'm going to grab my paintbrush tool again. I'm just going to drop that color in, very easy. And behind that, I'm going to add a dustier color to denote the distance from where our foreground is and our background is. I'm just going to add a little bit of a dusty color, and again, sandwiching this thing like a Big Mac. We want to be able to add some of those colors in between colors, so that we have a good idea of where things sit on the page, right? So what I'm going to do, because this is sitting behind it, is I can actually go above or underneath my darker orange layer, because what I'm going to do is drop this in like so, like that. And we have a little bit of distance. So if we turn on our darker layers, it looks something like this, right? Again, these flats are not going to be super detailed, but I am going to label them, and I'm labeling them so that as our layer cake gets taller, we'll be able to find where things are. And I like layers because it'll allow me to work and manipulate a part of an image without disturbing anything else that I've already done. So I'm going to start with our first layer, which is labeled layer 5. I'm going to label that dark sky blue. The layer above that, I'm going to label gradient, and I'll come back and change that. Above that one is our lighter orange. I'm going to label that one distant sand or distant sands, and then the darker orange, I'm going to label that sand dunes. And this is going to become extremely helpful again as we build up this illustration, as we build up our layer cake, as we build up our Big Mac. This will allow me to identify certain parts of the picture, and because I'm putting things on separate layers, that's a pretty good way in order to manipulate things without messing anything up, right? So again, we're working our way from the back forward. So the next thing that I will do is add a little bit of color to our statues that are standing in or emerging from the sands. And for that, I'm going to use this reference of columns that I found sort of on Wikipedia, and I'm just going to give these a very quick color over top like this. And I might even go a little bit darker because our scene is pretty dark, so we don't want something super duper bright. We don't want things to feel like they don't belong, right? So I'm going to go a little bit darker, and I'm going to desaturate it just a bit, and then I'm going to go back over it and color this in. Again, this doesn't have to be perfect. This is just sort of the starting point from where we will create all of the details and give all of the additional information to this particular image, right? All right, and I'm going to do the same thing with the statue or the monument that's sticking out. I'm going to add the exact same color, and I might change it when I come back to do details. But for right now, this is sort of giving me the baseline. Now, this began as a thumbnail. This particular sketch began as a thumbnail. And as I create thumbnails, usually when I'm creating cards or any illustration for that matter, I do give myself a very rough idea of what those cards should look like. So I'll show you here what that looks like in terms of, just the practical development sheet. Now, this is the development sheet that I did for the threes of this particular project. Within that, I made notes of keywords that I wanted to include, meanings for numerology, common meanings within tarot itself. And then from there, I took that and applied it to a real life scenario. So in our case, I had an idea of having my main character sort of come to the discovery of these monuments, of this portal, of this sort of environment beyond where she is sort of coming from, because our card before this, which is the Two of Wands, deals a whole lot with planning and researching and, making or getting information together, right? So we took this stick figure and it did evolve into the sketch that we are working on currently. And again, oh, well, not again, because I haven't showed you guys. So this character is actually one that we've seen before. And I'll show you what she looks like and why. I'll tell you a little bit about why I chose to go in this particular route. So I did choose this because with tarot, there doesn't have to be, but needs to be some continuity between your cards. This was a project that I started and didn't necessarily have an idea of what I wanted to do or where I wanted to go. So as I've gone and developed the cards over the years, I have added and pulled things from previous creations to sort of bring consistency throughout the deck. And this is one of those instances. So this is the strength card illustration, and I'll zoom in so that you all can see it just a little bit better. This is the strength card illustration, and in it we have our main character, right? This is our main character. She's emerging again from a forest, but our major arcana cards, which the strength belongs to, deal with major life changes, right? Anything in our minor arcana cards deal with the mundane. So although she has come out of this at a younger age, she's kind of made this large transformation in her life. She shows up again a little bit older, but she's dealing with more mundane tasks. Again, I use this same character in the Page of Swords, and I kind of keep continuity between these characters. And there are a few elements throughout the deck that show up time and time again as I've sort of come to develop, the cards, right? All right, so we do have our monuments sort of in place, and these will show up a little bit in the background of our lighter sandy area that's further in the distance. We'll have more monuments pop up, but for the time being, we're just going to note all of the most important things. So the next thing that I want to make a flat of is our wands. And because we have a very orangey scene, these wands I want to have sort of a burned, sort of barren feeling, because she's coming out of one barren place and she's sort of making her way through to the next phase. But as she's coming to this clearing, she's sort of seeing the possibility of new things. She's making this discovery that there is something far in the distance ahead for her to come upon. But I do want to make note that she's coming out of this sort of forested area where things are not quite alive, right? And so because of that, I want to make the flats of this particular, my wands, right, that are connected to the earth, I want to make them a bit of a desaturated brown color, right? But the wand that she has, maybe we'll make it the same color. Maybe she made her wand or her walking staff from the same trees. And so we'll give our wands the same color so that the reader who's pulling this card in addition to having the number at the top of the page, we'll also be able to identify that there are 3 sticks or 3 wands in this image. All right, so I'm just going to give them, and like I said, this doesn't have to be perfect when you're laying flats. You can use the lasso tool if you want to get more precise with your selection and with your your painting and your rendering and things like that. But because I know that this will all be tightened up a little bit later, very much like the page of swords that's showing up in our preview screen, all of that started this way, right? We laid down flats and then we took our time with it. Now below that layer, I'm going to add a new layer and I'm going to call that cliff. Now this particular layer is going to have a very similar color, right? But this is going to be the area that she's coming out of. And I want it to be lighter, or much lighter than the things that we have in our background, because this is the foreground, right? So to go from light to dark to light, or much more accurately, it'll go from highly saturated to least saturated, or not quite as saturated, right? Meaning that this area will be a little bit brighter, a little bit more vibrant than everything else that's happening in the background. And as we go towards the background, towards our pyramid, things will be a lot duller and lighter. We'll sort of create a gradient as we go, but we'll work all of that out later. So that is the cliff. On top of the cliff sits a rock. So we'll name this rocks. We'll give it a even lighter color, maybe a grayer color. We're going to paint this in. And this is just our flat layer. And we'll come back and add all of the details and all of the nuances at a later point. But we do want to make note that we have this particular information in. All right, and we will go and color in our other rocks like so. Now there are also bushes and grasses and things like that that are happening in the same scene. So what I'm going to do, because there is a bush here, what I'm going to do is I am going to create the color for that. I want it to be, because this is at night, so I want it to be relatively dark, but I do want it to be green. I'm just going to lay in a very generic shape, right? Sort of in the overall shape of this bush that's sort of laying here, right? But all of this is going to be relatively sparse. And this is, again, a nighttime scene. So I don't necessarily want to, I just want to have the idea of it there, right? All right, so the next thing that I want to do is I want to give our character her skin tone. And then I want to add the details to her, not the details, but sort of the flats to her outfit. And then we'll call it a day. And the next week, hopefully, if you guys are back with me live, we will continue to work on this particular image. But this is generally the first step in rendering, right? So meaning the first step in adding color and details that I like to take as I create digital illustrations. Now I might have to make some adjustments to her skin tone, because again, this is set place at night. But for the time being, this is just going to give us an idea of where to begin. She has her ear, her chin, her neck here. So wherever her skin shows up, I'm just laying in this flat. Now I'm doing this manually, but I'll show you in just a moment another way that you can do it. We'll do it with her legs. That may be easier, may take a little less time. But I just like the idea of moving the stylus across the screen. So I like to do this manually. But let me show you really quickly another very quick and easy way that you can do it. Now I am grabbing my lasso tool. In Clip Studio Paint, I have that set to the shortcut M. So I just hit M on my keyboard. And what I will do, just like I did with our sand dunes, is I will outline the shapes of whatever I want in this color, right? So we will make our outline, we'll make our selection using the selection tool. This is also called the lasso tool, depending on which program you're using. And I'm going to hit the shift button, and I'm going to do this same thing on the other side. And that way, by hitting shift, I am selecting both aspects at the same time, and I can then go in and use the paintbrush or paint bucket tool to drop the color in. All right, so let me try that again. Now, when we have some, very tight corners and things like that, within Clip Studio Paint, you do have to be a little bit careful because it will cut itself off. But we're just going to make this super broad, right? We don't necessarily have to have this be the most perfect selection in the world, because we're going to tighten this up and we're going to make it a lot cleaner and a lot smoother a little bit later on down the line. Now that I have my 2 legs selected, what I'm going to do is hit the G button. That'll give me my paintbrush. I hit it twice, not paintbrush, my paint bucket. And I'm going to drop that color in just like that. Now, with Clip Studio Paint, sometimes you have to hit it a couple of times for it to work. But there we have it. We have our skin, right? Now, to speed things up a little bit, I think I am going to do that for the rest of her outfit. So I do have her skin. I'm going to make a new layer on top of that. And I'm going to call it her shorts. So she has some shorts underneath her pants. I'm going to do the same technique where I'm going to use my lasso tool to outline that area. I'm going to go over here to my reference image. I'm going to grab a hold of that blue and I'm going to use the paint bucket tool to drop that in. Like so. And again, a new layer I'm going to do on top of that. This one is going to be her skirt. And I'm labeling everything as I go. Again, I like to do this because this helps me from getting, or keeps me from getting lost in the multiple layers, and the more complex my image gets, the easier it is to get lost if things aren't labeled, right? So I do my best to label all of my layers and go from there. Now this color, I'm going to go with the brown. This is going to be pretty close to the color of our sand, but it stands out just enough. I'm going to zoom out so you guys can have an idea of what that looks like. Looks good. Now back on my shorts layer, I'm going to relabel this blue, right? And the reason that I'm doing that is because she actually has the same, she's sort of wearing a leotard, right? So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take my lasso tool. I'm going to highlight all of this area that I want this particular color. I'm going to zoom in a little bit because if I go forward, it is going to disallow me to, go around her curves. So we do something like that. We're going to grab that paint bucket. I'm going to select the same blue that we used down below. And by doing so, I'm going to hit the Alt button, select that blue, drop it in just like that. All right, now she's wearing a vest on top of this. So what I will do is put this, I'm going to keep this underneath the skirt, right? Same thing, same deal. We're going to take our lasso tool. Again, for me, that is the shortcut of M. If you're using something like a Photoshop, generally the shortcut is L. But because I am using Clip Studio, the shortcut is M. And then you can change the shortcuts to whatever you're comfortable with. This just works fine for me, right? I'm going to pick this same color from her skirt using the paint bucket. And I'm just going to drop that in. Just like that. Now she also has this same color sort of here. But what I'm going to do instead of using my paint brush or my paint bucket is I'm just going to brush this in. And then I can tighten it up a little bit later. But by using the lasso tool, things do move a lot faster, right? But in digital work, there's always more than one way to do a thing, right? So there's really no right or wrong way to go about it. Just do whatever you're comfortable with, whatever you've practiced, but don't also be afraid to try new things, right? Now she has so I'm going to call this vest. She has a collar on. I'm going to do a new layer. I'm going to label that collar. And for this, I actually am going to go ahead. No, you know what? I was going to go ahead and plug in the gradient, but I think what I'm going to do instead is just lay in the base color, and then I can come back to it a little bit later. Just like so. And then lastly, we're going to put in her hair. And I'm going to find wherever her skin tone is. I'm going to put the hair above her skin. Label it hair. I'm going to pick up this blue that we used for her hair. And in this case, rather than using the lasso tool, I am just going to go ahead and use my brush. And then we're just going to paint it in. Now again, because we have such a dark background, I'm going to be doing quite a little bit of work to adjust things so that I'm creating distance where there needs to be distance, but I'm also creating sort of the completed look, right? So now her hair is very blue, very, very close to our background. So what that tells me is that I'll probably need to raise this lighter color up. And I'll show you a little bit better what I mean. I will need to raise this lighter color up so that her hair doesn't necessarily get lost in the translation of this image, right? Because I have to keep in mind that this is going to be a printed card. It's going to be very small, and so I have to bear in mind how things will look. So this is pretty much it. The last thing that I'll probably do here really quickly is I am going to add in the pyramid in the back. The pyramid, I have not decided whether or not this is going to be like the actual traditional pyramid in terms of its color. For now, I'm going to make it that a very sandy look. And I am using my paint bucket as well here, but I'm going to lower the saturation. I'm going to keep it relatively dark. I'm just going to drop that in, right? Just so that we have the idea. And that's pretty much the first step that I take in order to render images. Now, if you have doubts, because I know that this does not look particularly pretty, right? I'll show you just a couple of the images that I use this technique with. This is one of them. This is the Page of Swords. Also, we have the Strength. I use the exact same technique where I lay in flats and then I do all of my details. And then we have, I do believe, the Knight of Swords. Now, the Knight of Swords is not as detailed, but it followed the exact same regimen, the exact same recipe. So if you're starting out as a digital artist, this is probably what I would advise doing. If you are comfortable with setting values. Now, again, this usually streams live every Sunday. So next Sunday, or whenever you're watching this, be sure to check out the live tab, because I'll have so much more information and there will be so much more detailed tutorials and things like that. But here is another example of how that happened. Laying down flats and then being able to come back and add details to it later. All right, so without further ado, thank you so much for watching this. If you liked this and found it valuable, please do me a favor and hit the thumbs up. If you would like to be notified anytime I go live or anytime I drop a new video, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. And until next time, I hope you all have a happy, creative, and prosperous day. Peace.